Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in today to learn more about Fielding's Neuropsychology Specialization Training Program. My name is Brian Wallen, and I'm here representing Fielding's Office of Admissions as Senior Admissions Advisor for this program. So I'll be your point of contact as you explore this program and complete the application process. I look forward to working with you all, and please feel welcome to contact me. Next, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Christine Jacquin, who will be hosting our information session today. Dr. Jacquin earned her undergraduate degree in psychology with a concentration in African studies at Northwestern University and her PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Jacquin is an active researcher and licensed clinical psychologist with a consulting practice focused on forensic and neuropsychological evaluations, and currently serves as Fielding Dean of Curriculum and Innovation, in addition to serving as a faculty member here at Fielding. I'm very pleased to be sharing this virtual space together today, and Dr. Jacquin, thank you so much for hosting this session. I will go ahead and hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Welcome, everyone. Very excited to talk with you today about the Neuropsychology Specialty Training Program. So, this is a little bit of an overview both of the program and of what we're going to talk about today. And each of these points will go into more detail. So, the Neuropsychology Specialty Training Program is a comprehensive and structured program for professional advancement and development in neuropsychology for licensed psychologists. It's designed to meet the needs of working professional psychologists, meaning you can balance this program with your practice and other work. The program combines both didactic courses and clinical experience. It's designed to be completed in 2 years, and we have small groups working together, about 15 students between the first and second year in the program, working with each of our faculty. All right, so let's go into those points in a little bit more detail. So, what does our curriculum cover? Well, this program's curriculum includes a theoretical grounding in all areas of neuropsychology, as you'll see as we get more into the detail of the content. And it also includes clinical experience. We cover neuropsychology across the age spectrum, so pediatric neuropsychology, adult neuropsychology, geriatric neuropsychology, and we examine numerous neuropathological and neuropsychiatric syndromes, how to assess them, and rehabilitation opportunities. The main components of the program can be broken down into 3 parts: the theory and foundation courses, the neuropsychological assessment portion, which includes both courses and overlaps with the clinical component, which is the third part of the program. So again, this is a bit of an overview, and we're going to talk more in detail about what the program involves. So first, the courses. The courses are designed to cover all of the essential knowledge needed in neuropsychology. We have only licensed psychologists in the program, so that means that we know that you have the foundational knowledge of psychology and clinical psychology or counseling or school psychology, depending on your specialty area. In other words, we know that you have the knowledge of the health services profession of psychology, and we know that that includes the basics of how to do psychological assessment. So we're building on your existing knowledge and skills by focusing in on clinical neuropsychology. First or at least first on this slide, there are the theory and foundation courses covering neuroanatomy, brain behavior relationships, neuropsychological disorders, and the basics of neuropsych assessment. And then we have more detailed, in-depth neuropsych assessment courses examining assessment of neurological disorders, the neuropsych assessment of psychiatric disorders, and of neurodevelopmental disorders. The courses are well, everything about the program is done at a distance. And the program starts in September of each year. So students begin in the fall of each year. And as mentioned, the program's designed to be completed in 2 years. So the way that it works is fielding has 3 terms each year. So there's fall term starting in September, going to about the middle of December. That's when students start. And then there's spring term following that from January to about the middle of April. And then we have a summer term starting in May, going till about the middle of August. And each of those terms, there's one class that is taught, and it's primarily time that you spend in Zoom meetings with your faculty. And so there's one weekend course meeting and case consultation meeting per month. 4 months in fall term, 4 months in spring term, and then 2 months in summer term. So you get a little bit of a lighter load in summer term. And so this equals out to 10 meeting weekends per year. So over the 2 years of the program, a total of 20 weekends of meetings in total. And everything happens on Zoom, so you can attend from wherever you want. And the difference between the faculty locations basically tells you a little bit about the likely, the time frame of those meetings. So you might choose a cohort or a group to meet in based on what times work best for you. The clinical component includes clinical experience that you gain in your practice or your place of employment. The case consultation component, where you engage in clinical case discussions, presentations, and discussions with other students, with the consultation of your faculty. And then there's the final professional evaluation. So, a little more detail about each of these. The clinical experience is 1,000 hours of experience involving neuropsychological testing and report writing. So basically, you're doing about 50 cases with about 20 hours, up to 20 hours for each case. And so this works out to about 25 cases per year for those 2 years on average. So, roughly a case every other week, which if you are in a clinical job currently, or have a practice currently, then most people are able to do their clinical experience quite easily through their existing jobs or practices. But certainly we can talk with you about options and opportunities if you're not sure how you would get this clinical experience. And some people need a little bit more time to complete the clinical experience, and that's okay too. Now, the case consultation is about that clinical experience. So you come in and present the cases, some of the cases, not all of them, not anywhere close to all of them. You present some of your cases through 200 hours of case consultation from the program faculty. And because this is done in a group format, that means you present to other students in the program, other students in the program present to you, and you get each other's input as well as the program faculty's input. So you get exposed to a whole variety of cases. And case consultation has its own separate fee from tuition. Now, the final professional evaluation assesses skills in neuropsychological intervention and assessment at the postdoctoral level. There's a work sample that you submit. So essentially a clinical report. Now this is done at the very end of the program. And so you've done all of that 1,000 hours of clinical experience and you've gotten that at least 200 hours of case consultation. And so, you're basically taking everything that you've learned through that clinical experience, consultation, and your courses, and showing, basically demonstrating your knowledge and skills as a neuropsychologist. So you turn in your clinical report and materials and then have a conversation with the faculty. That's the oral examination. This is essentially the one kind of work product that is done, to show your achievement of all of the competencies for this program. So those are the courses and the clinical components of the program. I mentioned earlier that some people need a little bit more time to complete the clinical experience and related case consultation. That's completely fine. We're happy to grant a third year to do that. And very occasionally, sometimes things happen and people need another year, which is okay as well. All right, so giving you the overview, a little bit more detail about the curriculum and the clinical experience. So now I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the curriculum content to make sure that you know all that is covered in this program, both through the courses and through the case consultation process. So in other words, not just about the learning in the courses, but it's also applying that learning to your clinical work. So one area that is examined thoroughly is the basics of brain functioning and brain processes. So that includes the origins, development, and functioning of the brain, as well as the broad areas within neuropsychology, including neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, neurochemistry, psychopharmacology, and behavioral neurology. This also includes the major theoretical paradigms and theories, as well as a deep dive into brain behavior relationships in all of the functional systems of the central nervous system, including the motor systems, sensory systems, praxis and perception, speech and language, learning, attention, memory, intelligence, other aspects of higher cognition, including executive functioning, emotions, and personality. We also look at factors associated with assessment of brain functioning, things that we have to take into consideration when we're doing neuropsychological assessment, such as age, education, gender, level of intelligence, culture, language, handedness, socioeconomic status, and so forth. We also look at factors that are known to be associated with neuropsychological impairment and recovery of function. Factors such as age at the time of an injury, or how early in life a neurodevelopmental problem occurred or started to manifest. Lesion characteristics in the case of a head injury or a tumor or some other um, uh, uh, insults to the brain. Chronicity of the problem, the momentum or changes over time, premorbid functioning, psychological factors, social factors, cultural factors, and so forth. We also look at specific brain disorders and syndromes, everything from neurodevelopmental disorders and so earlier in life neurodevelopmental disorders to neurocognitive disorders typically later in life. We look at both those developmental disorders and acquired disorders like traumatic brain injury, infectious disorders, and then a variety of other kinds of brain disorders and syndromes. We also jump right into the principles of neuropsychological assessment. And again, we know because you're a licensed psychologist, if you're going to do this program, We know that you know the basics of psychological assessment, and many of you may have assessment practices. It's okay if you don't. But we know that you know those essential elements of psychological assessment, typically. So we're building on the knowledge that all psychologists would have, and that includes examining and considering the differences between assessment and testing, process assessments versus norm-based assessments, qualitative versus quantitative assessment, relative levels of performance versus absolute levels of performance, and then a variety of other ways of approaching neuropsychological assessment, including a hypothesis testing or scientific approach, and factors such as looking at the appropriateness of tests based on their psychometric properties, using neuropsychological factors to determine disability. So there's a lot of elements of neuropsychological assessment that are not necessarily the same as the basics that you learn in grad school of psychological assessment. And so we are going beyond and expanding upon some of that foundational knowledge. And then you'll learn about what a comprehensive neuropsychological assessment includes. Not only clinical interviewing and how we do clinical interviewing from a neuropsychological perspective, but also how we look for signs and indicators of behavior and mental status from a qualitative perspective, how we choose tests that are appropriate to different kinds of referral issues, what tests we would choose and or what the options are, and how to then carry out a full neuropsych assessment, oftentimes including personality assessment as well, how to extract relevant neuropsychological information from records, and how to integrate everything together to draw conclusions and write a report and make recommendations. We'll also look at specific neuropsychological tests with a focus on understanding and conceptualizing test data. So it's less about learning X, Y, and Z tests, while, that's going to be important. Again, we know that as licensed psychologists, you know the basics of neuropsychology, or we know that you know the basics of psychological testing, psychological assessment, and so that also means that you're familiar with some tests already. And so we help you understand how to look at tests, how to evaluate tests, how to learn new tests, and then how to make sense of the test data. And in particular, the most psychometrically sound test data, or data from the most psychometrically sound tests. We'll also introduce specialized neuropsychological tests and other related instruments and questionnaires, and discuss and look at flexible battery approaches versus standardized battery approaches. So a whole variety of aspects of tests and the choice of tests. Well, we also look at neurodiagnostic testing, not only from neuropsychological tests themselves, but how to incorporate neuropsychological test results with the results of structural imaging, electrophysiological tests, functional imaging, and so forth. And then we look at the application of neuropsychological assessment in a variety of contexts. One of the great things about working in groups where you work not only with our expert faculty, but with others who are licensed psychologists as well, who are becoming neuropsychologists like you, is that our students work in a whole variety of contexts. And so you get exposure to applying neuropsych assessment to contexts that you don't work in. And these very typically include contexts such as school contexts, psychiatric facilities, rehab facilities, forensic context, so applying neuropsych assessment to the legal arena, to occupational settings, to pediatric populations, geriatric populations, and so forth. All right. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of what this program involves, both in terms of the curriculum and what we cover there, as well as what you learn in the clinical experiences and case consultation. So I'd like to summarize the program benefits. The biggest benefit is the professional development aspect. You're expanding your knowledge, competencies, and scope of practice to become a neuropsychologist. You obtain certification of completion of training that shows that you've undergone this professional development process. In some states, you may be able to count the courses as continuing education or professional development courses, depending on what you need in some states and provinces. If you are interested in becoming a board certified neuropsychologist, this program provides you with board preparation. There's also the networking opportunities, both with our faculty and with other students, and a whole host of professional development benefits, like learning from other students in the different contexts that they work in. There's also some benefits to being a student. You have access to Fielding's fantastic research library. So we have really amazing coverage of a wide variety of journals, certainly the neuropsychology journals and medical journals that I read regularly, we have full text access to, and just the full spectrum of psychology journals and even some books. Some test publishers offer discounts for students. This varies from publisher to publisher, and frankly, it seems to vary a little bit from year to year as to what they're allowing. But typically, there are some test publishers that allow students to buy neuropsych and psychological tests at a discount. And when that is true, if you need anything from us, from the program or the faculty, we're happy to provide that, like an endorsement or a verification of student status. So I like to mention at this point how the National Academy of Neuropsychology defines a neuropsychologist and put our program and what you get in our program in that context. So they say, you get a doctoral degree in psychology from an accredited university training program, and that doctoral degree is in clinical counseling or school psychology. Have an internship or its equivalent in a clinically relevant area of professional psychology. So you all come in with that as licensed psychologists, you would have to. And that's also this last point, licensed to practice psychology. Um, and then the part that we help you with is the equivalent of 2 years of experience in specialized training in the study and practice of clinical neuropsychology and related neurosciences. So we give you that 2 years of both the didactic and the clinical experience. Now, the 2 years of supervision by a clinical neuropsychologist, we of course call it consultation because our faculty to supervisor is a term that has legal meaning that varies from state to state, province to province. And so, what our faculty do is consultation because they're not necessarily licensed in the state that you're working in. They're not responsible for your cases. So, they're consulting rather than supervising. But from the National Academy of Neuropsychology's perspective, it's the same. That's what they're saying you need is that expert consultation as you are gaining your clinical experience in neuropsychology. And so you get that here. Now, note that the National Academy of Neuropsychology and other organizations make clear that board certification, so being a board certified neuropsychologist, is not required for the practice of clinical neuropsychology. But if you are interested, you can pursue board certification in neuropsychology after you complete the program. And there's two boards, ABPN or ABCN, that you can pursue board certification in neuropsychology from. Our program meets the educational requirements of board certification for both of these boards because both of these boards use the Houston Conference guidelines as the basis for the educational requirements for board certification. So our program gives you that. Now, and prepares you very well for the board exam. Now, board certification can require in-person supervision by a board certified neuropsychologist, which, as I mentioned, our program is typically not providing because you're not generally or you don't need to be located in the same place as our faculty. So you're meeting on Zoom. But if you are interested in board certification, we can certainly talk with you about how to get that in-person supervision so that you're certain to meet that requirement if you're pursuing board certification with a board that requires that. All right, so if all of this sounds interesting to you and you'd like to apply to the program, it's helpful perhaps to hear about the application requirements. It's pretty straightforward. You've got to have the doctoral degree that allows you to get licensed in the US or Canada. And you have to be licensed as an independent doctoral level psychologist, documented by a US state or Canadian province psychology licensing board. And Canadian provinces sometimes call it registration. And some US states in school psychology call it registration or certification. But that's what's needed. You need to be licensed to practice independently at the doctoral level as a psychologist. And then the degree that you needed to get that is the degree that we are going to require of you, which is the doctorate in clinical counseling or school psychology, or a postdoctoral respecialization certificate in clinical psychology. And of course, APA or CPA accredited program or program in a college or university that's regionally accredited. So you submit your transcript of your doctoral degree for your application, a copy of your current psychologist license, which will be verified in the application process, your CV, and your statement of purpose describing your interest in the program and your plans for the clinical experience. And our application deadline is in July of each year to start the program that September. If you have any questions about anything that I've mentioned here today, or anything else about the program, please feel free to reach out. We have admissions advisors who are very happy to speak with you. And you can also reach out to financial aid if you're interested in learning about financial aid options. All right. Great talking with you today. Thanks so much. Bye.